And with that, I will give my last 2 minutes of the update to Tamar to talk about a really important national survey that she is fielding that we all want you to participate in. It takes about 45 minutes, and I'll let Tamar talk about the rest of that, and then we'll scoot right into our presentation.
Thank you, Angie. And what a lot of exciting stuff that's going on at CUNY. It's really wonderful to hear all about it. I'm eating into my own time, so I'll be quick here. We all know that some of the most exciting innovation in higher ed is going on at community colleges around workforce. What we don't know nationally is how much is going on, how broad and how deep it is. I mean, CUNY's a perfect example. You know, who knew exactly a year ago how much excitement was happening here and how much innovation? And that's true nationwide. And it's important to know, not just because like we would all like to know and it's sort of nifty research or what have you, how can governors, legislators, Congress for that matter, they're all trying to think about how to put people back to work with limited funding. They need to know what the institutions in their jurisdictions are doing to put people back to work. So long story short, I can say use the English language. We have Lumina funding. We have a major survey in the field right now. It's sitting in your email inbox, or it's in your president's email inbox, or both. Or if you don't have it, please get in touch with me. That asks you to tell us about your workforce offerings. There are a couple questions on credit, but mostly it's non-credit. And it is everything from, you know, enrollments, completions, demographics, to, you know, harder questions like how do you embed industry certifications? Not harder, but, you know, more probing questions about how do you embed industry certifications? How do you assure quality control of ACE programs? If you haven't started it or taken a look, I don't like to beg, but I beg you to. And that's in the field. We hope to, we anticipate that the survey will close basically at the end of the year. So you have a few more weeks, but I'm guessing your Decembers are busy, so I urge you to turn to it. Okay, with that, and if you don't have it, and if you need anything, I mean, there's it's on my website, opportunityamericaonline.org. But if you can't find, you know, feel free to email me. Angie knows where to find me. You probably know where to find me. We can personalize, deliver a personalized version. So with that, we will turn to certifications. So I'm going to do a little, we have two wonderful guests from Florida, and thanks to Mildred and Russell for being here, and now you know a lot about CUNY. I will, I'm going to wait to introduce you for just a moment because I wanted, well, let's see, let's look at our slides and we'll go that way. Let's see, how do I share here? Let's see, oh, am I sharing already?
No.
Okay, let's see. I can't get out of this somehow. Oh dear. Hold on, I'm so sorry. Technology. Now I can't even see you. Oh, so sorry, folks. Okay, there we go. Try again. Share screen, open slides. Okay, I'm not going to try to do this and talk at the same time. I'll wait to open them when one of the Florida folks are talking. We have two guest speakers. Mildred Coyne is the Senior Vice President of Workforce Education and Innovation at Broward College in Florida. Mildred is there behind the in front of the cherry blossoms. It's not that sunny in Florida, but that will give you an idea. And Russ is the Dean of Transportation Programs at Broward College. And Broward College, now I'm going to get this wrong, you guys, but Broward College is like a huge college. It doesn't say community in it, but it was originally a community college. They've taken the word community out of the Florida names. It's something like 100,000 students, right? When you look at credit and non-credit, is that correct?
63,000.
But that includes credit, the 63?
Yes.
Okay, big school, serves Southern Florida. But we're going to talk about, and Florida is one of the states that's way ahead, has been doing it for 15 years in figuring out what certifications have value, encouraging programs, high schools and colleges to embed them in programs, and making sure that they articulate to other things. But I want to start with I'm going to do a little primer before I start asking questions. You know our usual style where I ask questions of the guests. But before I ask questions of the guests, I want to do just a little primer on certifications, kind of what they are and the language. And this is where my slide would come in handy, but we'll share the slides later. Credential is the overarching term, right? Credential applies to degrees, applies to certificates, applies to certifications, applies to licenses. Certificates and certifications sound the same, but they're actually very different. People across America get the terminology a little wrong, and you're always having to correct them. It's sort of like Republicans and Democrats were called, Democrats and Democratics. I mean, it's crazy that these two very different things have the same name, but they are distinctly different. So what is the difference? A certificate is basically like a mini degree, right? A certificate is something that you earn for sitting in class. It's a normal, sometimes it's non-credit, but it's butts and seats time. And at the end of that time with your sitting there in the chair, we'll not use another 4-letter word, you get a credential of some kind. Usually a certificate they're often job focused, they're often shorter than a degree, but they're conferred by the institution for time in class. A certification is not conferred by the institution. A certification is a competency-based evidence that you know how to do something, usually based on a test developed by an employer group. So the association, the Automotive Skills Excellence Association will bring a bunch of employers together every year and say, what do you need to know to be an auto mechanic? I guess they call them technicians now, light repair technician. And they'll establish a bunch of skills and they'll create a test. And it's a little bit like a driver's license in the sense that it doesn't really matter where you learned how to be an auto mechanic. The point is, can you pass this test? And the beauty is that for learners, they know they're learning stuff that employers want. For employers, they know that the people that come to them with these skills, it's a kind of a easy way to hire, because they know that the learners have these skills that they've specified matter for the job. And for institutions, it helps you understand what to teach, right? This is a way to understand what is making people job ready. The use is proliferating across America, and you're gonna see in Florida. We've got some amazing numbers in Florida of how Florida has increased the attainment of certifications. But 30 out of 50 states now have a list of which certifications they think are valuable, and that's one of the challenges, because there's 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, no one really knows, certifications out there, but only a small number of them really matter to employers. I mean, I could go tomorrow and make the Tamar Jacoby nail polishing certification and it would not have any value. So the challenge is to figure out which ones have value. 30 states are sorting through them to figure out which ones have value. And colleges are coming up with all kinds of interesting, varied ways of embedding them. Sometimes they just teach to the test and then they trust that the learners will go take the test by themselves somewhere. Sometimes they actually make the test that comes from the employer group the actual final exam of the program. So that way you're really teaching to the test. Sometimes you're required to actually take the test and pass it to get, pass the course. I mean, there are all sorts of different options here of how to embed, and institutions are experimenting across the country, and we're going to hear a little bit about Florida. So I think the way to think of it is it's a new currency. Degrees are the old currency that were able to show what you knew how to do and what your abilities were. This is a new currency. Right now it's kind of existing alongside the degree currency, and the idea is, how do we build bridges between them so I can convert my rubles to dollars or pesos to dollars or whatever I'm converting. But I think that's how I think of them, as sort of alternative currencies. So I think with that, I think that's enough of a background. The key is this distinction between certificates and certifications, and we all fall back into the how many times in my discourse do I say certificates when I mean certifications? We all do it, but they are really different animals. The other piece about how their recognition, Lumina, which has this sort of the pioneer of the attainment goal in America. They were the first ones that said, you know, we want 60% of Americans to have a high value credential by 2025. And now like 45 states have attainment goals. Lumina had just this year, 5 minutes ago, you know, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, added certifications to its attainment goal. So, you know, when they started 10 years ago, all they cared about were degrees. Now they have certifications in their attainment goal. So it's a growth industry. It's the new thing. It's exciting. So with that, let's go to the Florida story. And again, apologies to Russ and Mildred. You've been sitting here silent all this time and you have so much to tell us. Let's start with you, Russ. So you tell us how you've got several programs in your empire that embed certifications. Tell us a little bit how that works. And just folks, so you have a roadmap, we're going to talk about the college a little bit first, how Russ is embedding certifications, and then we're going to back up a little bit to the state level, how the state is incentivizing and helping to pay for and all that kind of good stuff. So Russ, the floor is yours for a moment.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tamar, and thanks to the CUNY team for inviting us. And actually, I enjoyed actually listening to the updates a little bit, because it's always fun to meet colleagues from other states. You know, I think there's so many good things happening across the country, and in some ways, it's like listening in on a parallel universe, because I hear a lot of the same you know, buzzwords and issues that you guys are managing that we're obviously managing here. So thanks for the opportunity. So as Tamar mentioned, I am the dean of actually a pathway called Industry, Manufacturing, Construction, and Transportation.
You just froze. Oh dear. It's another day for technical.
It's not everyone. I think it's just Russ.
Yeah, I think so too. So Mildred, why don't you step in maybe a bit while Russ gets his technology together. So let's talk a little bit about how the state, let's skip to the part of the story where and this is about, let's see, I have the date right here, about 15 years ago, where the state first started figuring out the equivalencies. And how did that work, and what was that? Tell us about that process.
So yeah, as a state system, the Department of Education had decided to really start taking a look at how we articulate credit from industry certifications, because we've been doing it from high school career and technical education programs into college credit programs, where we accelerate a student based on the coursework that they took in their secondary experience. Then the state also started looking at doing the exact same thing for nationally recognized third-party credentials, those industry certifications. And so the way that they did this, it was a challenge, I'm not gonna lie. There was a lot of gnashing of teeth from our faculty members and a lot of concern about the integrity of credit. But when we got to the point, so what the state had done was they identified those highest earned credentials, those credentials that had the highest volume of students earning them, or community people or community earning those credentials, and created a matrix. And then by pathway, if you will, shared that matrix with our workforce deans across the state. And now we're called the Council for Workforce Education. And what we did then, each dean then took that into their community college. We're now called the Florida College System, because we have many schools that offer bachelor's degrees, almost all now of our 28 community colleges. And what we did with that was take that to our faculty and our disciplines, and reviewed how many credits that each school felt that they could award for an Adobe Illustrator certification, or an A+ certification, or take it however you want it to be, a C+ certification, whatever it was, in any pathway. And then each dean would bring it to their disciplines. And that's where it was really interesting to see how it all unfolded, because some schools were very open to it, as you know. I mean, there's going to be early adopters and people that accept things on a faster way than others. And so, but what it allowed us to do from a state system was to come up with a common number of credits that we would award for certain certifications. And some came back and said 0 across the board. Some would say we are not going to award any college credits for these certifications because they're just too basic, and they would require a bundle in a certain area. And that happened a lot with some of our Microsoft certifications, and Adobe. But that's just the way in which we were able to come to a statewide understanding of how many credits and an agreement. So now we have statewide agreements for certain industry certifications that students, any incoming student, whether they come from New York or they're from within Florida, that they are guaranteed to get credit for at a local Florida college institution.
Just to recap, just to totally boil that down to the absolute essence, the states basically asked the faculties, the deans of the colleges, to sort of bid, how much are you willing to award for this certification? And that was a statewide process where they got all the colleges saying, Broward might say, well, we'll give 4 credits for Adobe, and some other college would say, well, we'll give 3 credits for Adobe, or no credits for Adobe, well, whatever, ASE. And then the state established a norm that Adobe will get you at least 3 credits or whatever it is in an array of courses at the colleges. So the state is already saying this is basically putting, again, if you think of it as currency, the state is saying, that peso is worth, 50 cents, and that's at least 50 cents. And if the colleges want to pay more than 50 cents, they can, but so now there's uniform across the system, the state, not the city, articulation of these certifications.
And each local school can go farther. So if you think that, the robust nature of your certified production technician in your manufacturing program, well, that's probably a bad example because that's a pretty standard 12 credit, that's a 15 credit articulation, right, Russ? It's not 12. I always think it's 12. Or is it 15? Russ is going to correct me.
Yeah, it's 15.
It's 15 credits. So that's you take the MSSC, Manufacturing Skills Council certification, and you take the certified production technician, and you're going to get 15 credits. That's a pretty good deal for accelerating you into the degree. And so, but what you can't do is go less. So if the state articulation agreement says 15, you can't say, oh no, I'm only doing 9. That's contestable. So, but you can go farther in some areas. Some schools go farther, and you can go beyond those state certifications.
What's the enforcement? Let's pretend the state says it should be worth 15 and you only offer 12. Like, what happens to you?
Well, I mean, the student would have to appeal to the state. I mean, I don't know that there's a vast process because it's more of a understanding in the state that this is a statewide articulation agreement, and if the state has an agreement, this is what you have to adhere to. But that would be, a student would have a right to appeal all the way through to get to the right credit. I don't have a lot of examples of that happening. I think it's because we've standardized.
Interesting. And this is in the context of a state where there's no bridge to nowhere, right? Like everything articulates, everything non-credit articulates to credit in some way. Everything in high school articulates to credit in some way. Everything a 2-year articulates to 4-year. I mean, it's not like New York, it's a different universe, but it's in that context.
Right. The other areas of state, which is interesting.
Hold on one second, but I just want to give them some graphics of what you've been talking about. This is the picture of what happens I just picked 3 at random certifications that translate to credit. This is what Broward offers. The state has its own separate list where these same credentials are listed, and the state has 144 credentials on its list. And I don't know whether, I didn't bother to look, do the crosswalk to see whether Broward's offering more or the same as what the state offers in these 3. But these are the courses that it can get you credit in, right? So it's it's very, and this is all part of what the deans agreed to on that original meeting where they sort of decided what the credits were worth. Was they mapped the certifications to courses, and they said, well, this actually does map to whatever AMT is, aviation mechanic, maintenance technician, 101.
Well, to be honest, to be full transparency tomorrow, we didn't actually ask the deans to identify what course.
Oh.
Because that can be a local decision. We do in Florida we're very fortunate to have a common course numbering system. across the state. So that common course numbering system is really advantageous in doing this. But every school was able to say, it's this course in my degree, or it's this course in mine. And so it's pretty close, but but that helped, I think, the faculty not have to be jammed, not have to be enforced which course it was. They could decide that.
So let's Mildred, we're going to stick with our switched order. I'm going to ask you a second question, and then we'll
Sure.
go to Russ. So tell us now about the financial incentives that come from the state to embed certifications, help students earn certifications.
So this kind of laid the foundation, the groundwork, but we then had a state legislature that got very aggressive about workforce and created an incentive pool. So we had industry certification performance funding, and the first pool was like $5 million. It's up to $10 million now, and what that meant was for every certification that was in a specific, so that same legislature identified 8 industry sectors that we would then put industry certifications that complied with any of those sectors. It was manufacturing, it was automotive, it was aircraft, maintenance mechanic, anything related to the FAA. It was a lot of IT certifications, it was welding, but the IT certifications were really specific. So it was like a staffer running out into a room of workforce people saying, give me a name of a certification, I got to put it on the list. And we ended up with this eight industry certification list. Like there was one that said cloud computing, one that said cybersecurity, but we were able to then, as a system, after that legislation passed, add on what industry certifications then those broke down into for those 8 industry sectors. And that was in 2013. And at the end of that year, at the end of that reporting year for 2013-14, we as a system had to submit. Now imagine this, because you have to capture evidence from your students that you have auditable evidence that they've earned the industry certification in that state reporting year, which was, that academic year. And then we had to submit them with our state records at the end of each year to be eligible for the certification funding, which was up to $1,000 per certification to the individual school. And so that's the way it started. And it was, it was really, Tamara has the graphic here, that was really hard in that first year because the systems weren't in place for us to report them. The first year, though, you all appreciate this, the very first year, the legislature also included earning the industry certification through continuing ed, which was really helpful for those schools that had robust continuing education and had already done the hard work of pruning out your recreation and leisure and focusing on your workforce development continuing ed courses. But then they just, in the subsequent years, they removed continuing education, and a student had to show enrollment in the college, a credit enrollment. Now, it didn't have to be within any of the programs. Like they could have earned an A+ certification outside of their business degree that they were in, and they would still count. So
I didn't understand that. So I want to clarify a few things you said. But you only get counted in this count if you're on the credit side of the college, enrolled on the credit side of the college? Oh wow,
that's true.
Okay,
I know.
Well, let me underline a few things that you've mentioned. So the thing about the counting that's hard, right? And many of you probably know this, is that the bodies, the certifying bodies, don't necessarily keep good records, right? And so they're not going to tell you, Susie, Jimmy, Mary earned certifications in most cases. The students aren't necessarily going to tell you. You can ask them, and lots of places do try to have surveys and what have you, but that's a survey of students. Like, what's that? We all know what that's worth, or something, but limited. If it's actually, if the exam is actually part of the course, you can tell who's taken it, but it can be very hard to figure out like who's actually taken it. And that's, again, one of the limits. There's work to be done still on figuring out how to embed these things. But I mean, look at this number, look at this chart. Like this is literally 954, like there are no zeros here. Like in the first year, 954 Florida students earn certifications. By 10 years later, 123,000 Florida students earn certifications. I mean, that's the kind of growth like you don't know like even how to talk about. And the point is, because this institution is getting $1,000 or up to $1,000. I guess it depends on the budget year for every student who earns one that they can figure out how to count. And the students know that the certification translates into credit.
And so there was the main undercurrent things that we had to do though in order to do that was like Tamar just kind of refined, was creating a system to document, because it is auditable. And so we would have to document that. And we had to then create the infrastructure in order to support the deans and the academic program leaders to be able to capture that evidence. Because if we just put it all on their back, it was just not going to happen. We were also having to overcome some of the objections from faculty that said, I don't think that there's any value in industry certifications if you want to know the truth. And so we had to overcome those objections. And we also had to then really refine how some of our courses and where the competencies for those industry certifications were being taught, and making sure that we were mapping back to the curriculum and the courses. And Russ can talk, we were starting to talk to Russ about automotive service excellence and what that looked like.
Right.
And then, so that's another second piece to it is really lining the curriculum to embed those competencies for the industry certifications. But then, and I lost my third point, but I will tell you that to Broward College in the last year, this meant $1.2 million. So we went from 147 certifications in that first year, and we were number one in the state, to being to having 1,535, and we were number two in the state, only behind Miami-Dade. But we've been number one in the state 5 of the 7 years. And we've actually taught Miami-Dade how to do it, because it is a process. And the reason why documenting and capturing is so important is because you need to be able to tell your story and be able to help understand why these certifications are important to your students. It wasn't just about us getting $1.2 million. It's about our students having the credentials to be marketable and aligned to the marketplace. And we also, and I'll wrap this up, is that we also then incentivize the students, because the students cannot be your single point of failure for collecting information, because you'll never win, because they'll always, you always have to be chasing down students. And so we've incentivized the students where we give them a voucher. We turn back the performance funding to half of it goes back to the departments that earned it. And then they incentivize students to take the industry certs, and we leverage Perkins funding. And we've always leveraged Perkins funding for industry certifications in this way.
Great. Great.
And we've worked with those third-party agencies a lot to get the information. That's how we get it, is we get it from the third parties.
Oh, you do? So ASE will tell you how many people?
Well, particularly in health sciences. So the health sciences accrediting agencies, they do keep records of their licensures. And then we just have someone that works with the department, and we have one staff person that we pay for from Perkins that manages it across the system for us. And they then work with each of the program managers, and we call and verify.
Oh, wow.
And it's been very lucrative for Broward College. I mean, $1.2 million in this era of declining returns.
To make some phone calls, right? Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get a picture of what the state does, and obviously New York State is not doing that next week. So you're operating. The people on this call are operating in a slightly different. All of you ACE folks, let's see, I'm going to go out of share now if I can figure out how to do it. All of you ACE folks are operating in a different context. But let's now come to what this means at the institution. So let's see, stop share, and we'll go to Russ. Russ, are you with us?
I think so. We'll try again. I apologize for that.
No. Thank you for sticking with it and coming back.
Yeah.
So now we have the context. So you wake up in the morning and you're in the state where you get $1,000 for every student that earns a certification. What are you doing with that? How are you using them in your programs? And forgive me on your title. I guess I've had your title wrong all these years. I've been half your industries.
No. And it's perfectly fine, because it switched. It used to be that, and it switched, and so that's fine. So yeah, I think I've got a few different examples. I oversee 39 different associate's degree, bachelor's degree, technical certificates across the college. And so
those are certificates, not certifications.
Correct.
Okay.
And so I've got a few different examples that I'll be happy to share. You brought up the example.
With a simple one. Let's start with ASE. Yeah, let's
sure. So ASE, Automotive Service Excellence, automotive certifications, for those of you who have familiarity with those programs. Our automotive program is very closely aligned to that certification program. So there are 8 certifications that our students pursue, all of which are fundable through the model that Mildred just discussed. And our students are prepared to take the exam at the end of each course, obviously, if they've paid attention. But
do you
getting
offer
them
it in the course? Like, where do
so
yeah.
so this is where it becomes challenging, because that's an example of a program where we do not have the certification exam tightly tied to the course. And part of the reason is a logistical challenge of we aren't able to proctor the course on site. The course is only, the exams are only offered at certain times. And so it's not possible for us to require them. We do fund them, again, through the model that Mildred just funded. Yep. So we will either use Perkins funding, or we will recycle the industry certification funding from the state, one way or the other. And those certifications are not expensive. I think it's like a $50 registration fee and then a $40 test fee or something. Yeah, it's very low. But getting students to take them is always a challenge. I mean, that's a big challenge. And automotive dealerships pay more for them. I mean, every single dealership that you talk to will tell you that they pay 50 cents, 75 cents an hour more for every one of those that you have. And so
just to clarify again, and I'm just sort of translating what you're saying, sort of 101 for people that may not be doing this. So, what the certification is like a list that all these employers sat down and came up with. To be an automotive technician, you need to know exactly how to do these 10 things around brakes. And you need to know how to do these 10 things around, I don't know what else they do in cars anymore.
Steering and suspension.
Suspension. Yeah, I was going to talk about cars that don't, carburetors or something. I know we don't have carburetors anymore.
Yeah.
But and then the point is, Russ looks at that task list. He knows what's on the task list for the test, and he designs his course so that he makes sure that the people learn those things so they're prepared to take the test. But you don't count the test. Can I pass the course without taking the test?
So the answer is yes, you can pass the course without taking the test. The other thing that I'll mention, but I don't want to.
That's not always true, by the way. Some places you can't pass the course unless you take the test.
That's correct. And I don't want to steer the conversation off track, but of interest to this group specifically is we will articulate credit for those who have earned those certifications outside.
Oh no, that's important. So
Yeah.
So let's talk a little. Well, yeah, sure, explain that. That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of high schools have automotive programs. There's a lot of vocational schools, private schools. You can earn them on your own. So students, if we're saying to our students that there's value in these certifications, we're going to train you to take these certifications and earn these certifications, then a logical next step is to say, if you've already earned it, we will give you college credit. So, there's an opportunity for people outside who maybe never considered Broward College or any college, never considered college life, to accelerate their path towards an associate's degree. And we're going to give them.
How many credits am I going to get for my automotive maintenance and light repair?
Well, so that one would be 24 because there's 8 certifications, 3 credits each. So 24 of a 64. I think that's a 64 credit.
It's a long
degree.
way toward a degree. And now the one we like even better. There's an FAA. So aviation. They're big on aviation at Broward. So FAA. What can I earn for some of my aviation certifications?
Yeah, so that one's an even better story because if you already have the airframe and power plant license that you've earned, through a high school program on your own, through the military, we'll give you 60 credits of an 83 credit Associate of Science degree. But again, there's a situation where the program is built entirely around what the FAA requires of students to take the certification exam, the license. In that case, it's licensure. But we don't require them to actually earn the license in order to earn the degree. I would love to, I have actually mixed feelings on it. In some ways, I would love for us to be able to do that. The downside is that our completion rate would drop because we have a very high completion rate in that particular program. But I'll just take a moment to mention that particular program, aviation maintenance, is one where the certification exams are actually very expensive. The licensure exams are very expensive. You know, there's 3 exams: a written exam, an oral exam, and a practical exam, and for the 2 licenses that you could possibly earn, and you know, all of that thrown together is easily over $1,000. And so we're putting a lot of students don't test specifically because they just simply can't afford it. So there's a quick story where we have worked with our foundation, the Broward College Foundation, to secure a private donation of $1 million to help us provide test prep course for students prior to the test, and then actually fund the certification exams on a reimbursable basis after they pass it. So they have to pass it, they have to front the money, but then we will reimburse it.
So why do you need test prep if you've already taken the course that's so aligned with it?
Well, because you know, test anxiety, it's a 5-semester program, and so by the time you get to your 5th semester, you've, you know, long forgotten what you learned in the first 3 semesters. And so you know, the 2 problem statements that we heard from students were, the reason I don't take the test is I'm scared of taking tests and I can't afford it. Right. So this donation was designed to address both of those points.
So let me step in for a second, and because then I want to talk about the certification you created with manufacturing or with industry.
Supply chain, yeah.
Supply chain. There's a little murky area here, because you just talked about, well, it's a certification, but it's also a license. I know in New York, a lot of what I've heard all of you on the call certifications turn out to be things that come from the government. And it's sort of, you know, in most of the country, there isn't so much of that. I mean, aviation is different because like aviation is, you know, the government is overseeing, and healthcare is sort of in between. Is that government? Is that industry? What is that?
It's a license, yeah. It's a difference in licensure. Licensure is required to work. You have to have the license, so in order to get the job.
And technically these are 2 different things, the certification and the licensure, but they do sort of overlap a lot. And that's so often I find I'm talking to folks from CUNY and they'll be talking about certifications, and then it'll turn out you're really talking about something that I consider a license because it's needed for the job. Many of these things that we're talking about still apply. It's just it's a little confusing. I mean,
and to muddy the waters even further, in the case of the FAA, what, you know, I say license because, to Mildred's point, they are required to work, so kind of making that distinction. But in fact, the FAA calls them certificates. So it's an airframe mechanic certificate. If you look in the federal regulations, it's an aircraft mechanic certificate. So yeah, that just muddies the waters further.
We'll eventually get the vocabulary straight, right?
Tamar, before you go into that next thing, one thing that I would like to add, if I can, is about in our areas of computer science. So computer science has really, they're very different. It's not required to work, but it makes you much more marketable to have a nationally recognized certification of competence in a certain area. Now, in our computer science programs, that was the area where we were the lowest in numbers of students earning certifications. It was also the area where we had the faculty and the program manager saying, I don't think that they're valuable in the marketplace, so I don't care about them. And we had to overcome that inertia. You know, we did get enough support around that to change that mindset. But then the faculty had to do the most work, and they did a lot of work embedding the competencies and then also embedding it as part of the exam, as part of the course grade. So to what your point was there, and some of them do it a little bit different. Some do it where it's required to take the test. You don't have to pass the industry certification to pass the course, but you do have to take it. And we pay for it, but we do want you to take it. And so it's really, so there's a little bit of a mix about that. And that's a model that we've seen has been really effective. And also that area is another area where the boot camps, we run a 5-day boot camp for students that have taken courses that have those competencies woven into this, come in and flood them with expert knowledge on how to sit and pass that exam for a few days or a week before those exams run. And that's been very effective too. The boot camps are important. But really, the other point that I wanted to make is one of the things that we're—
that for a second, I'll come right back to you and let you make that point. A lot of different colleges across the country do this thing about getting them to the test differently. You know, how you count the test, do you count it for credit? Is it exactly the same exam? Is it just incentivized? Do you offer the exam? Sometimes if it's not a proctored exam, you can offer it in the classroom. I mean, that's complicated now, but that there's a lot of variation and experimentation on that. But like in Virginia, you know, one of the guests that we've had in the past talking about the Virginia model, in Virginia, if the student doesn't take the test and pass, the college, for a certain program of funding, the college has to pay for the third of the course. So the college doesn't, you know, not only, they don't get money back, they have to spend money if the student does not take the test. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways that systems are trying to think about how do we make sure that we're aligning our learning with these valuable things, and that people actually get to the end and complete and get the darn piece of paper. So Mildred, sorry, coming back to your second point.
No, so it's all very true. And we've actually then worked with a lot of testing sites so that our testing center then can become a proctored test environment. It's ASE, it's a little bit more of a struggle. Some of them are harder than others, but we do have that aligned with with our testing center for some of the proctored exams. And that was another part of the work that we just have evolved. The other last point that I wanted to make is that we've really looked at how we can leverage then continuing education and the ability to offer robust immersion, industry certification courses to build a CE pathway to degree. And so that's one of the things that we've been really focusing on. And we've just received CARES funding from the governor through the state of Florida for what we're calling rapid credentials. And we're doing that now where that's allowed to be used for continuing education and credit. And so in our continuing education side, it's for continuing education courses that result in an industry certification, because then we know that we can, because ultimately our goal is education attainment, particularly in our communities of poverty. We know that we're trying to get to a higher level of education attainment. And in order to do that, we're using CE, continuing education, as a way to really disrupt the entry point into higher education, because it's not working the way we've been doing it for 70 years. It's not working for everybody, let's be honest. And so we can get people to start in a Lean Six Sigma course or a project management course or a certification course to get them confidence and competence that will then articulate into credit using continuing education without all the roadblocks and barriers of traditional college admission. Even though we're an open access institution, we still require federal, all these applications and documentation and evidence of residency and all this extra, the blood of your firstborn to be able to get into a credit course at a community college. And so this has helped us really. In fact, we were able to, even before the pandemic, lay the foundation for this CE to degree pathway for six zip codes in our community with the highest unemployment and lowest education attainment level. We call it Broward Up, unlimited potential for these 6 zip codes. And we've certified or trained 2,067 people in the first 2 years. And that's not all of them got industry certification courses. Some of the courses were just baby steps of CE courses to get people started so that where they could get confidence for an industry certification.
This is the ultimate
I just
payoff,
wanted to lay
right?
that out there.
No, that's really helpful. That's the key point. This is the ultimate payoff, right? This is the ultimate payoff. These certifications are nice in themselves, and you can earn in some fields, Russ gave us some numbers. In some fields, it's even more. It's another 20K on top of your salary in some fields. But the point is, they're nice in and of themselves, but it's one of the best ways, I would argue, maybe it's the best way to do that transition from continuing ed to curriculum, because everybody now recognizes these competencies. We're teaching them at the college. It's a very clear unit. It's not like based on some random, it's still based on a test, but this is what increasingly colleges across the country are using as that currency, that you say, I earned this currency in my non-credit life. Now I want to convert it for credit and re-enroll or enroll or whatever we're going to call it at that institution, and get some time off for it, get some credit. That's the payoff here. And I know this is where the CUNY Credit for Prior Learning is going. But what I would argue is the CLEP test and all those other tests are interesting, but in a way the certifications are the best currency. And we're sort of talking about how you can potentially, and I know a lot of your institutions do. I know Jane and Sunil and many and others, Kingsborough, I know you've started down the road of recognizing certifications that get you credit. But the point about Florida is, here's a state that where it's the experiment is mature. They've been doing it for 10 years, and they've now it's a whole system. It's not just an experimentation here and an experimentation there. So let's last thing before we open to questions, let's have Russ talk to us, because Russ actually worked with an industry group to create a certification and embed it. So just tell us a little bit about how that worked.
Yeah, sure. So back in 2011, we started an Associate of Science degree in supply chain management. Some people call it logistics. It's all related. And then we followed up with a bachelor's degree a couple years later. And that's right when the whole TACT grant program was ongoing. And I know that many of you are familiar with that program. I think it ran 4 years, maybe 5. I think it was 4 years. And so when the round 3 of the TACT grant program came out, that was the U.S. Department of Labor grant program. We had just started our supply chain management bachelor's programs, and so we were all kind of about supply chain management. And one of the things that we noticed was that there really wasn't a comprehensive industry certification program that existed, and so we put together a consortium of schools around the country and partnered with the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, a big industry group based out of Chicago, to create a program that consists of 8 certification tracks and different aspects of supply chain management. I'm proud to say that we secured a $24.5 million grant. That was the single largest grant in the college's history to put that program together. We've served well over 20,000 students through that program since 2013. And although the grant program itself has run out, we continue to administer that program, which is now called SC Pro Fundamentals, on behalf of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. That's the background to then tell you what Tamar asked, which is obviously when in creating the certification program, even though the certification program was designed with the TACT population in mind, which was returning veterans, long-term unemployed, and those at risk of being displaced due to outsourcing, we didn't want our college students, our credit-seeking students, to not have the opportunity to take advantage of that program. So we very early on embedded those certifications into our certification, into our Associate of Science degree program. And practically what that looked like is the certification program comes with online content, has a companion PDF file for those who prefer to sort of consume the material that way. And it essentially replaced the textbook. So although there was a cost associated with the certification exam, which was $135, we're not requiring students to buy a $100 textbook any longer. And that program, so there's 8 of them. We have all 8 embedded within 8 different courses. And there's an example of where students do have to take the certification exam as their final exam for the course. But it's still possible to pass the course without passing the certification exam, because the final makes up, I don't know, 20% or 25% perhaps of the total course grade. And we do have the opportunity to articulate credit for those who have earned it previously. So again, another example of where we've partnered with Mildred's group through Continuing Ed and then through Broward Up, the initiative that she mentioned, to offer those courses in a non-credit format throughout our communities, in community centers throughout Broward County. And the participants who then earn those certifications, if they decide to enroll at Broward College as a credit-bearing student, again, are already 3, 6, 9, 12 credits ahead.
Okay, so let me stop you, Russ, because I'm starting to notice people in the chat saying goodbye and stuff like that. I don't think it's a vote of no confidence, but let's open to questions because we've been talking for a long time.
Sure.
And the question is, how does this translate to CUNY, where we don't have that state apparatus and we're doing experiments that are leading toward what's happening in Florida? Again, I kind of see it as like CUNY's kind of at the beginning of the pathway and Florida's 15 years down the road. And maybe you can do it faster than 15 years, but Florida shows, what it can look like when you get there. Questions, comments, thoughts from the floor?
Tamara, I have a quick question. Would love to ask Mildred and Russell, when they did the articulations, did they have to get vetted through departments and academic senate, or was it sort of an understanding that this was an equivalent to existing coursework?
Well, it actually worked out great because it was being done by the state. But I think if like to what Tamara was just kind of setting the stage, if you don't have a state initiative that's leading it, I would still say we're doing it even now in excess of what the state is requiring for certain industry certifications. Because it was hard for us when Russ was talking about the supply chain, because that wasn't on the state's radar. So you would take it to departments, and then if it worked to go through your faculty senate as you built the infrastructure. And when I put in the chat the link to the state website, and it lists all the individual agreements. So while there's a list of all the different certifications for each pathway, each individual industry certification, has its own agreement. And then you would just use that agreement and say, okay, let's lay out the competencies for our accrediting body. That's the way we do it when we're articulating from high school or when we're articulating from our tech colleges for a vocational certificate. We just map out the competencies, say, here's the competencies that are earned in the industry certification. And here's which course that we're offering has the closest competencies. And if there's 3 skills that are missing from the industry cert or from what we wanted to map to, we can adjust or modify to make sure that it's meeting the credential standard or the quality standard that our faculty require. And so I think even though we had a state system that was leading us to do it, it's very doable at a local level, starting with a willing faculty member that recognizes and values what the certification does for your students in the marketplace. And especially if they're already teaching some of those competencies. Russ made the perfect point. If we're saying that these qualifications are important for our students to learn, then wouldn't we take them from an incoming student that already had the credential, had that certification? So that's where I think that you can, I had been already doing a lot of this type of articulation with our faculty from different areas. So it can be done locally without an overarching entity leading you to it.
So I wrote this up once, and I don't know if this is really true. This is one of those dangerous things where you've written it and published it, and then you say what you wrote, and it's not quite right. But my understanding is that 15 years ago, the state decided on, as Mildred said, a few areas where they thought certifications were valuable. And they started, the canary in the coal mine was the manufacturing skills standards CPT credential. And they, again, bid it out, so to speak, if they didn't really bid it out, but they went to the colleges and they said, tell us what it's worth. I don't know exactly who was in that room, which is what your question is, was the faculty senate in there? Yeah. My understanding was it was sort of some council chosen in each institution by the institution. I don't know for sure, but and they were 3 steps. They had to decide, is it worthy of credit at all? I thought, Mildred corrected me a minute ago, but that they did have to sort of relate what course it was going to be related to, and then they had to put down their number, and that happened at colleges across the state, and then they and now they've decided that that certification earns you a running start in 3 associate degree programs offered at colleges across Florida. And now they've done it for 143 other certifications. Who was exactly in the room, I don't know, but
and that work started on an NSF grant, an ATE NSF grant for manufacturing, particularly in Florida. But that did have faculty. That was a very big movement in Florida around that manufacturing certification, and it really did help us. But because they kind of standardized the curriculum across the state. Pardon me?
I could see the CUNY system having a process like this, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it's not like Angie and, the chancellor will decide that a CompTIA, whatever, A+ is worth 3 credentials, but you could have this kind of, democratic input, so to speak, on
Right.
what CompTIA is worth. I mean, your credential for prior learning system does it a little differently. One college sets a standard and then the others have to share it. But this is another way of getting the same thing, of sort of getting buy-in around what the value is. Other questions?
Quick question, Mildred and Russ. I'm curious if how you went about prioritizing, or how does a certification get on your radar for this process? What factors did you consider? Was it local labor market demand? Was it salary gains per certification? How does it get on your radar to go through this process?
Well, for me, it was really about the student outcomes, or the student, and that actually was the hardest ones, because it was a gain for the student, but we were already doing it in all the licensure areas that are required for work. So in all the healthcare areas, it was already a part of we're leading you to take that state licensure exam, because you need to have that to work in nursing, respiratory, whatever, or dental. So that part of it that was natural, and was already a part of the work that we as a community college were doing, preparing that technician level employee. But in the areas where it was harder, we did look at where were the outcomes going to be greatest for students. So, and then, like, when you think now, like, there's big headlines that I can show you any day in the week, you can all find them. Google, Apple, IBM, all the companies that are saying they care less about a degree and more about the competencies that you have. And a way for someone to document those competencies is through industry certifications. And so that's becoming a much more and even now more so than when we were doing this for the last 10 years, right? Or 7 years.
So Micah, a lot of states do what you're suggesting differently. So sometimes it's done at the state level, sometimes the college level. Again, 30 out of 50 states have lists that say, we think these, in Florida, it's 144. Some other places it's smaller number. Some other places it's a bigger number. We think these are the valuable certifications. And there are a couple of different criteria that go into that, right? Labor market information says that industry is important in our area. Employers in the region or the state say that they're actually going to hire people and pay them more if they have those certifications. You can really validate that the certification is preparing people for the job. Again, the Tamar Jacoby nail polishing certification isn't going to get you much. So it's sometimes done at the state level. New York has a list, I believe. I mean, the last time I looked at it, it wasn't very good. It was mostly for high schools, and it literally had 13 certifications on it, and they weren't very up to date. I don't know what they have now. This was a long time ago. But so sometimes often the state helps you figure out which ones are valuable. You still have to decide as an institution, what am I going to offer? But often the state helps you. And again, Virginia has a very good process for this. Florida has a good process for this, for figuring out which ones are of value and publishing that list. And then those offer guide rails to the institution.
Mm-hmm. And in Florida, the funded ones are a more refined list than the full list that I shared with you in the chat. So the funded ones, and each year we as schools have to submit, we can submit new ones and other ones will come off. In fact, most recently, a lot has come off the high school funded list, because they were not robust enough. So they also have to, they are also focused, we do focus on robust, meaning that they're more than just, a 3-hour course certifying you in X. So there's certain level of robustness that's in there too.
I mean, the other thing I guess I want to highlight, I'll ask other questions, looking for other questions, but, like every conversation about community colleges, there's that question about how do you get the faculty on board? And in a way that was Sunil's question, and that's what sort of Mildred's been talking about. But Florida again shows that that's doable if you kind of present it in the right way, and you make clear what the gains are, and you make clear that this is related to the competencies they're already teaching. Other questions?
This is Wei Yin from QCC. And thank you. This is so wonderful. I have a question about sustainability. I know that you talked about using Perkins and Pell Grant for leveraged funding, but when the funding is over, So, yes, it can be done easily. So for example, at QCC, we try to work with the faculty to bring in the Google IT. And yes, they agree that students can transfer up to 15 credits. But, this is, again, with the funding support. How do we make it successful when the funding period is over? Do we turn it into like tuition? For those programs that mentioned, do we charge tuition after the funding period? What is the secret to success?
The other question that every conversation about non-accredited community college comes down to, first it's the faculty and then it's the funding, or maybe
Yeah.
vice versa.
Can I take a stab at that,
Please.
Tamar? Because we've thought about this a little bit, and I mentioned one strategy in my comments a moment ago, which is that right now we are using recurring Perkins funding. Mildred's shop oversees the Perkins grant, and so every year I go to her, the dean that works under her, and beg for Perkins funding, and it's pretty easy to get. No, I put in my request, or recycle the industry certification funding. But your point is a very, very valid one. And so the example that I gave a moment ago was in our supply chain management program, where we've essentially said, hey, there's this $135 certification exam, which comes with all the study materials. That becomes the textbook for the class. So this doesn't necessarily apply on the non-credit side, but for the credit side of the house, what that does for us is it allows us to put the book, the study materials that has an ISBN number, into the bookstore, which then allows students to use financial aid to pay for that study material plus the certification exam. So that is one strategy. That doesn't necessarily work, for everything, but that's certainly one way that we've addressed that particular question.
Let me just say one thing, and then Mildred, pass to you. I mean, this is happening on the credit side and the non-credit side, right? This embedding of certifications. And if you're embedding a certification on a credit course, people use their Pell, right? It's the same old story.
Well, you can,
but go ahead.
There's some limits. So I'm sorry, Tamar.
No, go ahead.
So in courses where the exam is required for all, you can build in then a course user fee or a lab fee. I don't know how everybody does it a little bit different around how you assign fees to a course. But if it's required by all, you can do that. But if it's not, you can't say everybody's going to have to pay a lab fee, and then they're not required to take the test.
Got it.
But then from a continuing education side, it's hard because that's not eligible for federal financial aid. So it definitely becomes a challenge. So we've done a lot of outreach to our philanthropy community, our employer community, and truthfully, in the whole Broward Up movement that I talked about, the 2,000 people that have gotten served in 2 years, we've invested $1 for every $1 we've invested at the college. We've brought in $12 from outside resources and support, and that covers. So none of those 2,000 people have paid for anything, whether it's the certification exam, the course itself, because we've been really looking to our community, both employer community as well as philanthropy, grants, other resources to cover that expense. It's been really, and it's only been in 2 years we've seen that kind of engagement, because it's really supporting lifting people up. So I know that's not a recurring answer. One other thing that we are trying to do now is locally look to our community redevelopment agencies, particularly because their aim is to remove blight and poverty. And so we have a current ask in for one of our largest cities in our Broward County to fund 200 to 250 people for certifications in their community redevelopment area.
I mean, I think this is the point here really, is that, to the degree we're trying to get funding for non-credit, certifications are a great tool and an argument. Because it's one thing to go to the government or to go to a foundation or whatever and say, oh, we have this great continuing education department and we know we have relationships with employers and it's valuable. But that's kind of an amorphous argument. If you can say, well, our non-credit programs are producing these people with these certifications, which are nationally recognized, valuable, employers are paying more for them. That's going to be our best argument in getting funding, right? Because like we're really offering something that has a kind of an imprimatur on it on the end that leads to something that's tangible, that's recognized widely. And so, to me, when I go up to the Capitol Hill and make the argument for funding for short-term workforce programs, the first thing I say is that they should be aligned with employers and you should get a nationally recognized credential at the end. And then suddenly there's a different kind of a, Congress says, oh, that must be valuable. So, I mean, it's chicken and egg. It's hard to pay now, but it's a key part of the argument that we are eventually or that we should be making now. If government's going to pay for some of this, this is what it should pay for.
Right. I definitely think that we have to band together around CE and short-term credentials, being eligible for federal aid. I mean, someone asked the question about the rapid credentials, and they're anywhere from 8 weeks to a year, but they're all programs that we put on there are not eligible for financial aid. So anything under 18 credits isn't eligible for us. And so it's also
this is what Florida did with its CARES money. It provided this money for students to take these programs. New York, they spent their CARES money, their GEAR money on K through 12, just so you know.
Another question was around how we transcript the articulated credit, and they get the individual courses on their transcript that are in that program with a grade of S. So they're not going to have a grade, they'll just have a grade of S. I forget what S stands for, satisfactory, I guess.
Interesting. Other questions? I'm sorry, I'm not reading the chat. I should be.
I'm sorry, I did more. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. I should have been. Other people question? That was another good Sunil question.
Yeah, we're on transcripting the individual certification, but we are saying, like, if they're articulating it in. Russ, is that correct? Did I just lie?
No, you did not lie. So it's a grade of CR actually for credit.
Oh.
And so a student who brings in an industry certification for which we are awarding 3 credits for a college course, it shows up on the transcript as CR. I read the question as if a student earns an industry certification as part of our program, does that appear on their transcript in any way? And unfortunately, it does not.
Right.
Next thing to fight for. There's a good question about dual enrollment. Why don't you talk about that to everyone, Russ? That's a good. So talk about that.
Yeah. So we had to fight long and hard to start what we call workforce dual enrollment. We've had dual enrollment for a long time in Broward County, but the GPA requirements were generally pretty high, and so and it was really kind of the domain of the general education coursework. So 3 years ago now, we started a partnership with the school district to begin what we call workforce dual enrollment. It does have a slightly lower GPA requirement, and it's in areas of aviation maintenance and marine technology. We have 4 high schools on board now, if assuming we restarted in January, because we're on pause this semester. And the aviation maintenance program I mentioned in the chat, there's a 3-year program that starts in 10th grade. And over those 3 years, the students are able to actually earn one of their 2 aviation maintenance licenses. So they can be an 18-year-old just graduated high school and have one of those 2 licenses, and hopefully they'll come to Broward College for a couple semesters to earn the second one. Marine technology is the other one, and there is a certification program through the American Boat and Yacht Council that we have embedded within the program, and in that case, students are working towards one of our technical certificates and then earning industry certifications along the way. So we're really excited about both of those.
And so again, this is what Russ just described is a very advanced form of how you can use this for high school, right? Because you've got these articulated pathways and these agreements with high schools, but you also have a more less systematized way of doing this, because you can earn these in high school. Many high school kids earn ASE certifications. Many high school kids earn, you know, I don't know, various IT certifications. You can bring them to Broward and you'll get college credit for them, whether or not there's a pathway and whether or not there's a high school agreement and formal dual enrollment. So it does build bridges very, very robustly between.
And even though we didn't talk about it specifically, perhaps there's a corollary in New York, but we also have articulation agreements from high school programs.
Right.
So, you know, high school magnet programs, maybe they don't necessarily lead to certifications, but if we know that they've taken certain coursework at the high school, we'll articulate credit, college credit as well.
I mean, so the other thing that I think is sort of popping out here, and then, sorry, I just stepped on a question, but we'll go to the question in a second. What's popping out here is like all these names that, you know, Russ keeps talking about these strange associations that award them, you know, to some degree. I mean, again, you're going to look at your college list, your state list, but although there is no state list in New York, but so partly it's about finding the good associations that are giving the certifications that do align and really count. Because I mean, you know, what matters in New York probably is, you know, probably aviation is not the top, you know, the top subject at CUNY. So, you know, what are the programs that you're really offering, that you're specializing in, then finding the certification that has value in that industry, that might be something that's on you, because there's not a good state list, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Russ finds a random association in Illinois and builds a certification with them, or, you know, digs up the certification in whatever it is.
Yeah, and Micah asked that question earlier about, you know, how do we kind of, what certifications do we choose? How do we figure out what we want to pursue? What, you know, my answer, just since you brought it up again tomorrow, I'll be really quick, is I go with the path of least resistance. And so if I already have academic programs and I find that there's an industry body that has a certification program, I'll try to match them up. I mean, that's, you know, that's the path of least resistance. The path of greater resistance is what we did with the TACT grant, to actually work with an organization to develop a whole certification program. Quite honestly, I'm not sure I would do it again. It was a lot of work. So, you know, that's kind of how I go about it. And we're always looking, you know, it's not a one and done initiative. Every single year I work with somebody on Mildred's team who manages that industry certification program, and he and I comb through the list every single year and see, hey, is there something new that we could grab onto? So it's a constant process.
Yeah.
I think I did step on a question someone was asking. Give me.
Oh, just a quick follow-up to the transcripting question. I'm curious if you guys are seeing a lot of students really walking across the bridge and getting into degree programs, following through on this whole process. What's that looking like so far? And maybe if there's anything you can share about how you go about tracking that, if there's anything aside from transcripting that's used in doing so.
Great question. How much crossover?
So I can start to answer that question and then turn it over to Mildred, because it's actually a person on her team that manages this. And so yeah, we're seeing more and more of it. I think as it starts to, you know, the word kind of gets out, and word of mouth is the best advertising you can do. You know, we're seeing more people come to us, especially right now, you know, with unemployment kind of shooting through the roof and people trying to figure out what their next steps are. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are coming to us saying, you know, what sort of credit for prior learning can I get? And so for the certification specifically, there's a woman on Mildred's staff who manages that whole process. She has a whole list that we agree to. It's an internal process that we agree to, that we say, if they, you know, come with this certification, we will award them credit for this class, and we process that through her. The advisors will, you know, just simply copy whatever evidence we have, whether it's a license or a test score result, and then she processes it and then sends it to the registrar's office, and then they end up awarding the credit.
Do we keep data on what I'm, you know, calling the credit for prior learning and crossover, Mildred?
Well, she certainly would.
Yes, yes, we do. And it's credit for prior learning is a bigger bucket. So it includes, because like I said, in Florida, and we've already mentioned, industry certifications is one articulation. Vocational certificate clock hour programs from our tech colleges into AS degrees is another articulation. And then another one is from high school, like Russ mentioned, a grouping of courses in a pathway articulating into credit is another. And so, as well as CLEP, other exams that you can take, or prior experience. So credit for prior learning that you might have from your work experience. And I heard you reference that Florida and New York has a model for that as well. So we've seen an increase for sure of people pursuing degrees through these vehicles. We've only in the last 2 years since we started Broward Up really started tracking that CE to degree very specifically. And it's a challenge in that we have a very large organization. And so Claudia, who Russ was mentioning, has to do an enormous amount of training to the front lines to make sure that when someone's coming into the institution, or they're ready now to take their degree or go into their technical certificate or their associate's degree, that they're actually getting that credit for their previous work experience or their other articulated credit. And so that's been a huge learning curve to work with our student services and frontline staff. So that's something that I would say has to be considered, is that it's not just like my department creating a process and saying, all right, we're going to award credit for this. It really involves a lot of the organization. The registrar's office is important, obviously, to transcript it and to get that person credit for it. But having the front line being able to ask the right questions, say, of somebody new coming in is really important. And so we've seen a growth. I don't have the numbers in my head. I'm sorry for that. But we have definitely seen an improvement. But it is an ongoing learning process, especially in an organization as 5,000 employees, so it takes a lot.
The other thing we haven't talked about at all, I know we're coming to the end of the time, is a lot of credit programs send students to the non-credit side to take certification courses, right? So you're studying to be an XYZ, but we all have realized that if you have a certification in that field, you're going to make a lot more money, but the credit side isn't offering a program that embeds certification. Now, I don't know if this happens in Florida, but in a lot of other states, you see credit students coming over to the non-credit side to take that, whatever it is, program to prepare them for the test. So that's another way that it's a tool to drive something bigger that we want, which is this closer collaboration of the credit and the non-credit. Not only does it give you a way to put some value on the table, here's my $5, but it also is something that many credit side learners want and are going to come to you for. So it's another way to kind of elevate that cross-pollination and that those bridges that I think that we all think are so important.
Right.
Chance for a last question. We have 1 minute left. All right. Well, so I'm going to put it to Russ. I'm going to give you a question, and you can see what you want to do with it. But talk to me about your faculty. Are your faculty all on board now? Do you still get pushback? How's that going?
I think I'm pretty fortunate. I wish I could tell you, yeah, I've had some challenging faculty and here's what I've done to overcome it. Unfortunately, I don't think I do. We've got really good faculty in the program. Some are very active in helping us do this work. Others just kind of, stand back and are, will do it. I don't think I've really had any situations where somebody has sort of actively fought against this. And part of it might be, I've been with the college for 8 years, so it could be that there were some fights at the beginning 10 or 15 years ago that I'm just not privy to, but since my time we've been lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only thing I remember in Russ's area, the hardest thing is when we started getting performance funding, was to encourage working with the faculty to really encourage the students to take those ASE exams. That was that was just really trying to get them to see, which they do now, see how important those are for work, for people to be competitive too. It's not just for the incentive funding. I definitely have been around enough to see that there is resistance to some of it. And it's in the computer science area. It's because it's harder. It's not as black and white as you need this to get a job or not. And that has been a little bit more of a challenge. And then but then they've also been really invested as well. I've seen many that were super invested in, so much so that they built the certification exam into the course. And so it's been a mix. And I think with everything, and this is hard I think as educators, for us to accept that I can be such an advocate and such a cheerleader and charge the hill type of person where I want everybody to join me. And when everyone doesn't, you can't get defeated or worry about you go with those early adopters that are really going to build momentum and support your students the way that you know is necessary for them to be marketable and competitive. And then you bring other people, you get those first then doubters on board and they start coming along. And before you know it, you just have a few that are left in the dust. And it's okay.
I love it. So, I mean, the last thing to say, just, I hadn't really put the two and two together, but obviously if the college is bringing in $1.2 million dollars a year for this activity, that's a great way to get the faculty on board.
Yeah. You think, but not really. Not all. And that's more for, we hope that keeps our deans on board, right, Russ?
All right, thank you, Florida. Obviously, if you want to be in touch with, I think both Mildred and Russ have put their information in the chat. I can also facilitate communication. Thanks, Angie, for the opportunity to have the conversation. We love this, and thanks to all of you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Really important, and I think you've given us a lot of food for thought on kind of as we're starting to make this turn, I think, at CUNY. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Mildred. Thank you, ACE.